Your driving record is more than just a file at the Motor Vehicle Administration. It is a history of your driving behavior. It tells a story about the choices you make behind the wheel. Every time you are cited for certain violations, involved in reportable incidents, or face licensing actions, those events may become part of your driving record. In Maryland, your driving record can affect your license status, your insurance costs, your employment opportunities, and even your future ability to drive legally. In this lesson, we will explain what a driving record is, what information it contains, why it matters, and how it connects to Maryland's point system and driver improvement requirements. Understanding your driving record is one of the most important steps toward becoming a safer, more responsible driver. What is a driving record? A driving record is the official record maintained by the Maryland Motor Vehicle Administration, or MVA, that documents your driving-related history. Think of it as your driving report card. It may include traffic convictions, points assessed against your license, suspensions or revocations, driver improvement program requirements, failure to appear in court, or failure to pay fines, certain alcohol or drug-related violations, and other administrative actions involving your driving privilege. Your driving record helps the MVA determine whether you are operating safely and whether your driving privilege should remain in good standing. It is not just about one ticket. It is about patterns, responsibility, and risk. Why your driving record matters. Many drivers do not think about their driving record until they receive a warning letter, a court notice, or an MVA action, but your driving record can affect many areas of your life. First, it affects your driving privilege. Too many violations or points can lead to required programs, suspension, or even revocation. Second, it can affect your insurance. Insurance companies may review your record when setting rates. More violations can mean higher premiums. Third, it can affect employment. If you drive for work or if your employer checks your background, a poor driving record may raise concerns. And finally, it affects your future. A driving record can show whether you are developing safe habits or repeating dangerous ones. That is why this program matters. The goal is not just to avoid punishment. The goal is to help you become a safer driver before the consequences get worse. What can appear on a Maryland driving record? Let's look at what may appear on your Maryland driving record. One major category is traffic convictions. If you are found guilty of certain moving violations, that can be recorded. Another is point assessments. Many traffic violations in Maryland carry points. These points are added to your record and may trigger action by the MVA. Your record may also show suspensions or revocations. These are serious administrative actions that affect your legal ability to drive. If you fail to appear in court, fail to pay required fines, or fail to comply with certain legal obligations, that may also impact your record and your license status. In some cases, your record may reflect that you were required to complete a driver improvement program or other corrective action. And for serious offenses, especially alcohol-related or reckless driving offenses, the consequences can be even more significant. Your record is essentially a summary of how safely and responsibly you have handled the privilege of driving. A common misunderstanding is that a driving record is just a list of points. That is not true. Points are only one part of your driving record. Your record is broader. It may include convictions, administrative actions, suspensions, revocations, program referrals, compliance issues, serious offenses, and other events tied to your driving privilege. Points are important because they often trigger action by the MVA. But even beyond points, your driving record can reflect whether you are following the law, responding to notices, and correcting unsafe behavior. So when we talk about protecting your driving record, we are talking about more than avoiding points. We are talking about protecting your reputation as a driver. How points affect your record? In Maryland, points are one of the most important warning systems tied to your driving record. When you are convicted of certain violations, points may be added to your license. As points increase, the MVA may take different actions. These actions can include sending a warning letter, requiring you to complete a driver improvement program, suspending your license, or revoking your license in more serious cases. This means that even if a violation seems small in the moment, repeated violations can build a pattern that leads to bigger consequences. A single poor decision may hurt, but repeated poor decisions create a dangerous record. That is why early correction matters. The best time to improve your driving habits is before the record becomes severe enough to affect your freedom to drive. How to check your driving record. One of the smartest things any driver can do is check their driving record. Do not wait until you receive a suspension notice. Do not assume you know what is on your record. Drivers should review their record periodically, especially if they recently received a ticket, they missed a court date, they were stopped by law enforcement, they were involved in a crash, or they have already been referred to a driver improvement program. Checking your record helps you confirm your current status, understand whether points have been added, see if there are pending issues, and take action early before the problem gets worse. In a driver improvement program, awareness is the first step toward accountability. You cannot improve what you refuse to check. Why? Some drivers get surprised. Many drivers are surprised when they learn their license has been suspended, or when they discover their record is worse than they expected. Why does that happen? Often, it happens because of avoidable mistakes. Some drivers ignore tickets, some miss court dates, some assume a violation is minor and will not matter. Others continue driving without checking whether their license is still valid. But in Maryland, ignoring the process does not make the problem disappear. In fact, it often makes it worse. A missed obligation can turn a manageable issue into a major one. That is why responsible drivers do not just focus on the road. They also pay attention to their legal and administrative responsibilities. Safe driving includes responsible follow-through. Your record reflects your habits. Your driving record is not just about one mistake. It is about patterns. It reflects whether you speed repeatedly, drive distracted, ignore warning signs, fail to respond to legal notices, or continue risky behavior after being cited. A clean record often reflects discipline, awareness, and good judgment. A poor record often reflects repeated risk, poor decisions, or failure to correct behavior early. This course is designed to help you break dangerous patterns. Because the truth is simple, a safer future behind the wheel begins when you take responsibility for the pattern, not just the last ticket. How to protect your driving record. Protecting your driving record starts with daily decisions. Here are some practical ways to protect it. Drive defensively, not emotionally. Avoid speeding, tailgating, and aggressive behavior. Stay focused. Distracted driving can quickly turn into a citation, a crash, or worse. Respond to tickets, court notices, and MVA letters immediately. Ignoring them is one of the fastest ways to damage your record. Check your license status and driving record if you are unsure where you stand. And most importantly, learn from your mistakes. The purpose of a driver improvement program is not simply to punish you for the past. It is to help you make better decisions in the future. A better record begins with better habits. Here is the key takeaway. Your driving record is your responsibility. It reflects the choices you make, the risks you take, and the way you respond when problems arise. It can protect your future, or it can limit it. When you understand your record, you gain the power to change it. And when you change your habits, you protect more than your license. Suspension, revocation, and hearing processes. For many drivers, the words suspension and revocation sound similar, but in Maryland, they are not the same, and misunderstanding the difference can make a difficult situation much worse. In this lesson, we will explain the difference between a suspension and a revocation, what happens when the Maryland Motor Vehicle Administration, or MVA, sends you a notice, why returning your license is important, and how administrative hearings work. These are not just legal terms. They directly affect whether you can drive, how long you may lose that privilege, and what steps you must take to get back into compliance. This lesson is important because some drivers make the mistake of ignoring an MVA notice, continuing to drive, or failing to act in time. And in Maryland, that can lead to much more serious consequences. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to clearly explain the difference between a suspension and a revocation. You should also understand what to do when the MVA notifies you of an action against your license, why you may be required to return your physical license, and how the administrative hearing process can affect your case. Most importantly, you should understand that once the MVA takes action, your response matters just as much as the original violation. A suspension means your privilege to drive is taken away temporarily. Think of it as a pause or interruption in your legal ability to drive. In many cases, a suspension lasts for a specific period of time or until you complete certain requirements. For example, a suspension may happen because of too many points on your record, failure to appear in court, failure to pay fines, certain serious traffic violations, failure to comply with MVA requirements, or driving-related offenses involving safety concerns. A suspension does not automatically mean your driving privilege is gone forever. But during the suspension period, you must not drive unless you have been specifically granted a legal privilege that allows it. Once the suspension period ends and once all conditions are satisfied, you may be able to restore your driving privilege. That is why suspension is considered a temporary loss of your license privilege. A revocation is more serious than a suspension. A revocation means your privilege to drive is terminated, not just paused. This is an important distinction. With a suspension, your privilege is temporarily taken away and may later be restored if you meet the requirements. With a revocation, the privilege itself is taken away. That means you may need to reapply, meet stricter conditions, and in some cases start over in important ways before you can legally drive again. Revocations are usually associated with very serious traffic offenses, repeated dangerous driving behavior, serious alcohol or drug-related driving offenses, or repeated failures to comply with Maryland driving laws and administrative requirements. A revocation should be understood as a much more severe action. It signals that the state has determined the driver currently presents a significant risk or has committed violations serious enough to lose the privilege entirely. Let's make the difference very clear. A suspension is generally temporary, often tied to a set time period or specific conditions, and may allow the driver to regain driving privilege once those conditions are met. A revocation is generally more severe. A termination of the driving privilege, often requiring reapplication or a more extensive restoration process, and usually connected to more serious or repeated violations. In simple terms, suspension means you cannot drive for now. Revocation means your privilege to drive has been taken away, and getting it back is a much bigger process. Understanding this difference is critical. Many drivers hear the words, but do not realize how serious a revocation can be until it is too late. When the Maryland MVA takes action against your driving privilege, you are typically notified through an official notice. This notice is extremely important. It may tell you what action is being taken, whether the action is a suspension or revocation, the effective date of the action, what steps you must take, whether you must return your license, whether you have the right to request a hearing, and what deadlines apply. Many drivers make a costly mistake here. They ignore the notice, they delay opening it, or they assume they can continue driving until they figure it out later. That is dangerous. Once the MVA has officially notified you, time matters. Deadlines matter, instructions matter, and failing to act can make the situation much worse. If you receive a notice from the MVA, do not ignore it. Ignoring it does not delay the consequences. In many cases, it only removes your opportunity to respond properly. You could miss your chance to request a hearing, miss a deadline to comply, miss the effective date of suspension or revocation, continue driving when you are no longer legally allowed to do so, and expose yourself to more serious legal consequences. This is where many drivers move from a manageable problem to a serious one. A driver who responds promptly may preserve options. A driver who ignores the notice may lose those options and make the case worse. The safest approach is simple. Read every MVA notice carefully, respond immediately, and do not assume you can keep driving unless you are clearly allowed to do so. In some cases, the MVA may require you to return your physical driver's license. This is not just paperwork. It is part of the compliance process. Returning the license shows that you understand the action, confirms that you are complying with the MVA's instructions, helps establish the official process for suspension or revocation, and may affect when your compliance period is recognized. A very dangerous misunderstanding is this. Some drivers think, if I still have the card in my wallet, I can still drive. That is false. The plastic card is not what gives you the legal privilege to drive. Your legal status does. If the MVA has suspended or revoked your privilege, the fact that you still physically possess the card does not make driving legal. In fact, failing to return the license when instructed can create additional compliance problems. So if the MVA requires you to return it, do so promptly and follow the instructions carefully. An administrative hearing is a formal process that allows a driver to seek review of an MVA action. This is important. An administrative hearing is not the same thing as a roadside stop, and it is not always the same as a standard traffic court experience. It is a specific process connected to the MVA's administrative authority over your driving privilege. Depending on the circumstances, a hearing may allow you to contest the action, present relevant information, explain compliance or hardship issues, seek a review of the decision, or clarify whether the action should proceed as written. But here is the key point. You usually must act within the required time. If the notice gives you the right to request a hearing, there may be a deadline. If you miss it, you may lose the opportunity. That is why reading and responding quickly is critical. The purpose of an administrative hearing is to ensure that there is a structured process for reviewing serious actions that affect your driving privilege. This is part of due process. A hearing gives the driver a chance to be heard, present information, clarify facts, show compliance, and respond to the action before or as it takes effect, depending on the circumstances. This does not mean the driver will automatically avoid consequences, but it does mean that there may be an opportunity for the case to be reviewed properly. In some cases, the hearing may influence whether the action proceeds, how long it lasts, what conditions apply, or what steps the driver must complete moving forward. Again, the most important point is this. A hearing can be valuable, but only if the driver acts in time. One of the worst mistakes a driver can make is to continue driving after a suspension or revocation takes effect. This can turn an administrative problem into a much more serious legal problem. Driving while suspended or revoked may lead to new charges, increase penalties, extend the time before you can regain driving privilege, damage your credibility during future review or hearing processes, and create a stronger record of non-compliance. In other words, the situation gets worse, not better. This is why the smartest response to an MVA action is not denial, anger, or avoidance. It is compliance. Read the notice, understand the dates, follow the instructions, request a hearing if appropriate, return the license if required, and do not drive unless you are legally allowed to do so. If you receive an MVA notice, here is the smart response checklist. First, read it immediately. Second, identify the effective date. Third, understand whether the action is a suspension or a revocation. Fourth, follow any instructions about returning your license. Fifth, check whether you have the right to request an administrative hearing. Sixth, act before the deadline. And finally, do not drive if your privilege has been withdrawn. These simple steps can prevent a bad situation from becoming much worse. Here is the key takeaway. A suspension is a temporary loss of driving privilege. A revocation is a more serious termination of that privilege. Both require immediate attention. When the MVA notifies you, that notice is not optional reading. It is a legal warning and a call to action. Returning your license, following instructions, and understanding your hearing rights are all part of protecting yourself from even greater consequences. The worst decision after receiving an MVA notice is to ignore it. The best decision is to respond quickly, comply fully, and take the process seriously. Driving while suspended, why it gets worse. Many drivers believe the biggest problem is the original suspension. But for many people, the real damage begins after that, when they choose to drive anyway. They may tell themselves, it's just one trip. I have to get to work. No one will know. I still have my license card. I'll be careful. But driving while suspended does not solve the problem. It makes it worse. It can turn an administrative issue into a criminal one. It can add more points, more fines, more court problems, more insurance consequences, and even arrest. In this lesson, we will explain why some drivers take the risk, what the legal consequences can be, how penalties escalate, what this can do to your record, insurance, and employment, what safer alternatives exist, and how to adopt a recovery mindset instead of making things worse. By the end of this lesson, you should understand not only that driving while suspended is illegal, but why it is such a damaging decision. You should be able to explain how one choice can lead to more charges, more delay, and a longer path back to legal driving. Most importantly, you should understand that the better path is not denial. It is recovery, compliance, and correction. Why do people drive while suspended? Usually, it is not because they do not know the rule. It is because they think they have a reason. Some need to get to work, some need to take a child somewhere, some need groceries. Some feel embarrassed asking for help. Some believe the trip is too short to matter. Some think they can avoid being stopped. And some simply do not want to accept the inconvenience. But none of these reasons changes the law. Driving is a privilege, not a backup plan when life feels difficult. The problem is that many drivers confuse need with permission. Yes, life may still require transportation. But once your privilege is suspended, your need to travel does not make driving legal. That is the hard truth many people resist. The decision to drive while suspended often starts with a dangerous thought process. A driver may think, it's only 10 minutes away. I'm just going to work and coming back. I know how to drive safely. I still have the card in my wallet. I won't get caught. But none of those thoughts protects the driver. The roadway does not become less risky because the trip is short. Police do not stop enforcing the law because the destination is important, and keeping the physical card does not restore your legal privilege. These are not solutions, they are excuses. And excuses often lead to escalation. A driver receives no credit towards suspension time until the MVA receives the license, and driving while suspended can lead to additional serious charges, fines, jail time, and arrest. This means two things are happening at the same time. First, you are already under suspension. Second, if you choose to keep driving, you are adding new legal exposure to the old problem. In other words, the clock is already running against you, and driving while suspended can make the clock longer, not shorter. Driving while suspended is not a harmless technical mistake. It can lead to new criminal or traffic charges, additional points, fines, possible jail exposure, arrest, and more time dealing with courts, the MVA, and compliance requirements. One form of driving while suspended may carry 3 points, up to 60 days in jail, and a $500 fine, while a more serious form may carry up to 12 points, up to a year in jail, and a $1,000 fine, with penalties increasing for repeat offenses. That is what "it gets worse" really means. It means the original problem does not stay the original problem. Let's walk through the escalation. A driver gets cited. Points are added. The MVA acts. The license is suspended. The driver ignores the process and drives anyway. Now there is another stop, another charge, possibly more points, possibly arrest, possibly court, possibly more suspension time. This is how one issue becomes a chain of consequences. And the more it repeats, the harder it becomes to explain away as a simple mistake. At that point, the system does not just see one bad day. It sees a pattern of non-compliance. And patterns are much more difficult to recover from. Driving while suspended may do more than add a ticket. It may affect how your case is seen in court. It may add to your driving record. It may reduce your credibility if you later ask for leniency or restoration. And it may make it harder to show that you are taking the process seriously. If you are already in trouble with the MVA, the smartest thing you can do is show compliance. But if you continue driving after being told not to, you communicate the opposite. You communicate that you did not respect the suspension, you chose convenience over compliance, and you continue to take risks after being warned. That is why this choice can have effects beyond one stop. It can shape how the entire situation unfolds. Many drivers think first about tickets and court, but the insurance impact can be just as damaging. A poor driving record can already increase premiums. A suspension can already create risk. But driving while suspended may make you appear even more high risk to insurers. That can mean higher premiums. difficulty getting coverage, loss of current coverage, needing more expensive high-risk options, and long-term financial strain. That means the cost follows you long after the stop is over. Driving while suspended can also hurt your employment. If your job requires driving, the risk is obvious. But even if it does not, many employers still check driving history, especially for jobs involving trust, transportation, delivery, or company vehicles. If you are stopped, charged, or arrested while suspended, the fallout may include missed work, lost opportunities, loss of employer confidence, trouble with future hiring, or difficulty qualifying for jobs that involve a clean record. The mistake many drivers make is believing that illegal driving helps them protect work. Sometimes it does the opposite. It can cost the very stability they were trying to preserve. A suspended driver often tells themselves this will happen only once, just this one trip, just this one errand, just this one day. But most serious problems begin with just this once, because once a driver breaks the rule once, it becomes easier to rationalize doing it again. And every repeated choice increases the risk of being stopped, being charged, being arrested, being delayed even longer in returning to legal driving. That is why self-discipline matters, not because it is easy, but because the alternative can keep getting worse. If you are suspended, your responsibility is not just to stop driving, it is to make a legal plan. That may include public transportation, taxi or rideshare, family support, friends, carpooling, walking when practical, employer coordination, trip planning in advance. Yes, these options may be inconvenient. Yes, they may cost money. Yes, they may require humility. But they are still safer and cheaper than another charge, another court date, another suspension problem, or another arrest. Legal inconvenience is still better than illegal escalation. The most important shift in this lesson is not legal, it is mental. A recovery mindset begins with accepting reality. If your license is suspended, pretending otherwise does not help. Driving anyway does not solve it. Anger does not solve it. Excuses do not solve it. Recovery means accepting the current status, following the process, not making the case worse, rebuilding trust with the system, and earning back the privilege lawfully. This is not a weakness, this is maturity. The strongest drivers are not the ones who keep forcing their way through consequences. They are the ones who learn, adjust, and come back better. If your license is suspended, here is the SMART response checklist. Do not drive. Return your license if required. Read every notice carefully. Track deadlines. Use legal alternatives for transportation. Complete required programs. And focus on restoration, not excuses. This is how you protect yourself from bigger penalties. This is how you stop the damage from spreading. And this is how you move from reaction to recovery. Here is the key takeaway. Driving while suspended does not fix the problem. It multiplies it. What may begin as inconvenience can become more points, more fines, more legal consequences, more time, more cost, and more damage to your future. The safest choice is not always the easiest choice, but it is still the best one. Stop driving, follow the process, use legal alternatives, and work your way back the right way. Financial and life consequences. Unsafe driving costs more than a ticket. Many drivers think the worst part of a violation is the ticket. But in reality, the ticket is often only the beginning. Unsafe driving can affect your money, your time, your job, your family, your mental health, and your future opportunities. A single poor decision behind the wheel can trigger a chain of consequences that lasts for months or even years. In this lesson, we will look beyond the citation itself and examine the real cost of unsafe driving. We will discuss fines and court costs, increased insurance premiums, towing and impound fees, lost income, transportation disruption, family stress, emotional consequences, and why cheap shortcuts often become very expensive mistakes. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to recognize that unsafe driving is not just a legal issue, it is a life issue. You should understand how one bad decision can spread into multiple areas of your life, and why safer driving is not just about obeying the law, but protecting your future. When many drivers receive a ticket, they focus only on the amount written on the citation. But the true cost is usually much larger. A citation may lead to a fine, court fees, points on your driving record, increased insurance costs, missed work, transportation problems, and emotional stress. In other words, the ticket is not the whole consequence. It is often the first domino. And once those dominoes start falling, the total cost can be much higher than expected. Let's start with the direct financial costs. These are the costs many drivers see first. Depending on the situation, unsafe driving may lead to traffic fines, court-related fees, costs associated with a required driver improvement program, license reinstatement fees, administrative processing fees, or the cost of replacing a license or other documents. Even before insurance is affected, many drivers are already spending money just to respond to the consequences. And if the issue becomes more serious, such as suspension, revocation, or court involvement, those costs can rise quickly. In some situations, unsafe driving can also affect your vehicle directly. If your car is towed or impounded, you may face towing charges, daily storage fees, release fees, and transportation costs while you are without the vehicle. If a crash occurs, there may also be repair costs, deductibles, rental car costs, missed appointments, or the cost of relying on others for transportation. Even when a driver says, "It was just a minor incident," the vehicle-related expenses can become significant very quickly. For many drivers, the most expensive consequence is not the ticket, it is insurance. Unsafe driving behavior, especially repeated violations, points, suspensions, impaired driving, or driving while suspended, can make you appear high risk to insurers. That can result in increased premiums, reduced coverage options, difficulty renewing your policy, or being placed into a higher risk category. Some drivers may also be required to provide proof of financial responsibility, depending on the situation. And unlike a one-time fine, insurance increases may continue for years. That means one bad decision today may keep costing you month after month, long after the court date is over. Unsafe driving can also cost you income. You may miss work because of court dates, MVA appointments, required classes, vehicle repairs, or lack of transportation. If your job involves driving, the impact can be even greater. A poor driving record may limit your ability to drive for work, affect eligibility for company vehicles, reduce trust from your employer, decisions for future jobs. Some drivers try to take shortcuts because they are worried about work. But often, unsafe driving creates even bigger employment problems than the inconvenience they were trying to avoid. Unsafe driving rarely affects only the driver. It often affects the entire household. If your license is suspended, if your car is unavailable, or if you face financial penalties, your family may also feel the impact. That can mean transportation difficulties, childcare disruptions, delayed school or work schedules, extra pressure on a spouse or relative, and financial strain at home. There is also the emotional side. Loved ones may lose confidence in your judgment if your driving decisions repeatedly create avoidable problems. Safe driving is not just personal responsibility, it is family responsibility too. Not every consequence appears on paper. Unsafe driving can also create emotional stress. Drivers dealing with violations, suspension, court issues, or insurance problems often experience anxiety, embarrassment, frustration, fear of being stopped, regret, and ongoing mental pressure. This emotional strain can affect sleep, relationships, focus at work, and overall decision-making. Sometimes, stress leads drivers to make even worse choices. That is why recovery requires calm, discipline, and honesty, not panic. The best way to reduce stress is not to hide from the problem, it is to face it and fix it. Another hidden consequence is loss of trust. Unsafe driving can affect how others see you, your employer, your family, the court, law enforcement, and even yourself. Repeated violations or poor decisions may create the impression that you do not take responsibility seriously. That matters, because in many situations, recovery depends on credibility. When you show accountability, people are more likely to believe you are improving. When you continue making the same risky choices, trust becomes harder to rebuild. Everything we've discussed becomes more serious if unsafe driving leads to a crash. A crash may involve vehicle repairs, medical treatment, lost wages, insurance deductibles, higher premiums, possible lawsuits, and long-term emotional trauma. And if another person is injured, the consequences may become even more severe, legally, financially, and morally. This is why small risky habits matter. Speeding, aggressive driving, distracted driving, driving drowsy, driving impaired. Each one may feel manageable in the moment, but if it ends in a crash, the cost can be life-changing. Many unsafe choices begin with the idea of saving something, saving time, saving money, avoiding inconvenience, avoiding embarrassment, avoiding delay. But unsafe shortcuts often become expensive mistakes. Driving while suspended to avoid a rideshare fare can lead to fines, towing, insurance problems, and more. Speeding to save 5 minutes can lead to points, a citation, and increased premiums. Driving tired to avoid resting can lead to a crash. Driving impaired to avoid leaving the car behind can lead to arrest, or worse, a shortcut that seems cheap in the moment may become the most expensive decision you make. Before making a risky decision behind the wheel, ask yourself 3 simple questions. What is this decision really costing me? Who else could be affected? Is this worth the risk? These questions can interrupt impulsive behavior. They can help you slow down, think clearly, and choose responsibility over reaction. That is what driver improvement is really about. Not just avoiding punishment, but developing better judgment. The smarter choice is often the less dramatic one. It may mean slowing down, putting the phone away, pulling over when tired, calling for a ride, leaving early, following the process, or accepting temporary inconvenience. But these decisions protect what matters: your license, your money, your job, your family, and your future. That is what safe driving really does. It protects more than the road. It protects your life outside the vehicle too. Here is the key takeaway. Unsafe driving is expensive. It may cost you money, time, peace of mind, opportunities, relationships, and sometimes much more. Safe driving, on the other hand, is an investment in your record, an investment in your finances, an investment in your family, an investment in your future. The best way to reduce the cost of driving is not by cutting corners. It is by making better decisions. Every driver makes choices. Some choices protect lives, some choices create risk, and some choices lead drivers into citations, crashes, suspensions, required classes, and long-term consequences. But this lesson is not about punishment. It is about what happens next. What does a driver do after making mistakes? Do they deny it, blame others, repeat the same pattern? Or do they take ownership, learn from it, and make real changes? That is what personal accountability and recovery are about. In this lesson, we will discuss owning your decisions, breaking the repeat offender mindset, learning from mistakes, rebuilding trust with family, employers, and the system, practical steps to stay compliant, and building a personal commitment plan for safer driving. Driver improvement does not begin when a ticket is written. It begins when a driver decides to change. By the end of this lesson, you should understand that recovery is not just about waiting for consequences to pass. It is about actively changing your mindset and behavior. You should be able to recognize unhelpful thinking patterns, take responsibility for your driving decisions, and build a realistic plan for safer choices going forward. Personal accountability means telling the truth about your role in what happened. It means saying, I made that decision. I ignored that warning. I chose convenience over safety. I kept repeating the same behavior. I need to change. That does not mean you are a bad person. It means you are being honest enough to grow. Accountability is not shame. It is responsibility. And responsibility is where recovery begins. Many unsafe drivers stay stuck because they keep looking outward. They blame traffic. They blame police. They blame other drivers. They blame stress. They blame timing. They blame bad luck. But improvement begins when the driver says, what part of this was my responsibility? That is the turning point. Unsafe driving is rarely one giant decision. More often, it is a series of small decisions. You choose whether to speed, you choose whether to check your phone, you choose whether to follow too closely, you choose whether to drive tired, you choose whether to drive after drinking, you choose whether to comply with notices and deadlines. That is why accountability matters, because if poor decisions created the problem, better decisions can begin to fix it. Owning your decisions means stopping the habit of saying, it just happened. Everybody does it. It wasn't a big deal. I had no choice. In most cases, there was a choice, and recognizing that gives you power. Because if you had the power to choose badly, you also have the power to choose better. One of the biggest barriers to improvement is the repeat offender mindset. This is the thinking pattern that allows drivers to keep making the same mistakes. It often sounds like, I know how to drive. I was just unlucky. That officer was too strict. I was only going a little fast. It's not like I hurt anyone. I can still handle it. This mindset minimizes risk and protects the ego, but it does not protect the driver. It keeps the driver from learning. Because as long as a person believes the real problem is bad luck, they will never address the real pattern. Breaking the repeat offender mindset means replacing excuses with honesty, not, I got unlucky, but I kept taking risks until the consequences caught up with me. That is much harder to say, but it is also much closer to the truth. Learning from mistakes is one of the most important parts of recovery. A mistake only becomes useful if it teaches you something. So after a violation, suspension, crash, or required class, a driver should ask, what happened? What was my role? What warning signs did I ignore? What habit led me here? What should I do differently next time? This kind of reflection turns a negative event into a learning point. Without reflection, people repeat. With reflection, people improve. The goal is not to stay stuck in guilt. The goal is to convert the mistake into wisdom. That is how growth happens. Unsafe driving does not just damage records, it damages trust. Family members may begin to question your judgment. An employer may begin to question your reliability. The MVA or the court may begin to see a pattern of non-compliance. And perhaps most importantly, you may begin to lose trust in yourself. That matters because trust is built slowly and lost quickly. The good news is that trust can be rebuilt, but not through promises alone. It is rebuilt through action, not, I'll do better, but I am doing better. That means following the law, completing requirements, keeping deadlines, making safer decisions, and showing consistency over time. Trust is restored when people can see the pattern changing. If your driving decisions have affected your family, rebuilding trust at home is important. That may mean being honest about what happened, stopping the risky behavior, showing better decision-making, following through on your responsibilities, and proving over time that the problem is being taken seriously. Family members often do not just worry about the ticket. They worry about the bigger question. Can they trust your judgment? That trust is rebuilt when your behavior becomes more consistent, more thoughtful, and more responsible. The same principle applies to employers, courts, and the system. If you want to rebuild trust, show compliance. Show that you can follow rules, meet deadlines, complete required programs, respond properly to notices, and avoid new violations. Employers and agencies watch patterns. A single mistake may raise concern. Repeated non-compliance raises red flags. The best way to show change is not through explanation. It is through consistent, responsible action. Recovery also requires practical discipline. Here are some steps that help drivers stay compliant. Read every ticket, court paper, and MVA notice carefully. Track all deadlines in writing. Know your license status. Check your driving record periodically. Complete required classes promptly. Do not drive when you are legally not allowed to drive. Repair safety equipment issues quickly. Address fines, hearings, or required responses early, not at the last minute. Many drivers do not fail because they are unaware. They fail because they delay. And delay often turns a manageable issue into a larger one. Compliance is not complicated, but it does require attention and discipline. Recovery is not only about legal compliance, it is also about habit change. Safer drivers build better routines. That may include leaving earlier so you are not rushed, putting your phone away before the trip starts, refusing to let anger control your driving, resting before driving when tired, planning sober rides in advance, and respecting speed limits and following distance. Habits matter because they reduce the need for willpower in the moment. If you prepare better, you have fewer risky decisions to make under pressure, and that makes safer driving much more realistic. At this point in the lesson, the most important question becomes personal. What needs to change in your driving? Every driver in this course should be able to name at least one unsafe habit that needs to stop. Maybe it is speeding, maybe it is distraction, maybe it is impatience, maybe it is poor planning, maybe it is driving tired, maybe it is ignoring notices until problems grow. A personal safe driving commitment plan should answer 4 questions. What behavior must I stop? What safer habit will replace it? What support do I need to succeed? How will I hold myself accountable? A good plan is realistic, specific, and personal, not, I will be perfect. But I will stop using my phone while driving by placing it in the glove box before every trip. That is clear, that is measurable, and that is much more useful. Many people improve faster when they do not try to do it alone. Support matters. Sometimes that support is a family member, a trusted friend, a mentor, an employer, an instructor, or even a reminder system you set for yourself. An accountability partner does not control you. They help keep you honest. They help remind you what you said you wanted to change. And they help recovery become a process, not just a good intention. Real improvement does not mean never making another mistake. It means fewer excuses, better awareness, stronger habits, more lawful decisions, and a visible pattern of change over time. A safer driver is not someone who never faced consequences. A safer driver is someone who learned from them. That is the purpose of this program. Not just to point backward at what went wrong, but to point forward toward what can go better. Here is the key takeaway. Recovery begins when excuses end, not when the ticket disappears, not when the suspension ends, not when the stress goes away. Recovery begins when the driver decides, I am going to own this. I am going to learn from this. I am going to stop making it worse. And I am going to build better habits moving forward. That is what accountability looks like. And that is what real driver improvement is all about.